You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Well, welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast. I'm Kristen Civiletto, and with me is my co-host, Julia Noel Rose. We are thrilled that you are tuning in from 102 countries and territories, all 50 U.S. states, and we know why. It is because we are bringing you the very best authors that are out there, and today is no exception. We are just thrilled to be talking with #1 New York Times bestselling author, Maggie Stiefvater. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I'm going to tell our listeners about you, but first I want to show them the cover of the beautiful book that we're here to talk about. It's called The Listeners. And now you have traditionally written young adult books, and many people know you from your amazing books. We're going to talk about those in a sec. But this is one of your first adult type books, and you knocked it out of the park. I'm just going to say that straight out. We loved it.
Thank you so much. It was such a labor of love and very long time coming. I started making the transition to writing for adults in 2019, and obviously it's not 2019 now. And I really wanted to, having loved coming of age, that's very punny, in young adult, I really wanted to learn the rules and just where you could play inside adult general fiction and be the most Stiefvater version of myself inside that new genre. So instead of just writing young adult with older characters, I really wanted to make full use of the territory that was given to me. So it was such a challenge, but I really loved it.
Yeah. In fact, you described something on your website that I thought was neat when you were talking about this book. I wanted to write controlled, intense, strange, sensual, truthful novels set firmly in a genre I'm increasingly thinking of as wonder, as in the opposite of horror. I thought that was really cool. And you actually went on and you said, or at least, what do you call it when the speculative aspects are more likely to provoke awe than terror? And I have to say, you really accomplished that with the story because, as we're going to see, there's kind of a interesting theme that runs through it that is so real that I really thought it was real and had to go look it up. It was pretty cool.
That is wonderful. I actually first got this idea of this genre of wonder because my longtime audiobook narrator, Will Patton, had gotten to the end of reading a million of my words. He got to the end of one of my series and he said he looked at the bookstore to see what else was out there, that he felt this hole in his life from reading my books, which was very flattering. And he said, but the other author that he reads all of the books for is Stephen King. So he has this horror background. And then he read my books and he said, we really handled that speculative element differently, even though we had that same proportion of it in a lot of our stories, where it's just that hint of otherness that's amplifying themes and plot elements that are already there. And I really do think that we have such a dearth of this wonder in adult fiction. We get to have it in children's fiction. Then young adult becomes this kind of what happens when you grow out of wonder and you realize that the world is awful and you have to navigate it anyway. And once I became an adult, I thought, well, the world is often awful, but the world is often extremely wonderful as well. And so a lot of people have said, are you really trying to break into this genre of wonder with a book that has Nazis in it? And I think I would say it has to have Nazis in it. Otherwise, it's just a fantasy, not even fantasy in the magical sense, but you have to know that things can be awful to have that sense of real earned wonder.
Yeah, I agree. And it's ambitious, but you absolutely land it. And, I think that'll be clear just from our discussion of it. Well, I do want to tell the listeners, though, about some of your other novels because you have best-selling books, the Shiver trilogy, the Raven Cycle, the Scorpio Races, and dozens of other YA fantasy novels. And also, just so our listeners love to hear a little background, you live in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia with your family and your dogs. In fact, if you don't mind me saying, I think you mentioned you have 7 dogs.
I have 7 dogs, but I live in the middle of nowhere where 7 dogs means a little bit less, I think, than if you're walking a brace of them down a sidewalk. But one of the real appeals of this book is that I was born in the Shenandoah Valley. And so I can see into West Virginia. We share those mountains. And the idea that there was real history like this nestled inside them. Anyone who lives in this state or in West Virginia knows about that interesting push-pull of both class and the love of the land that comes up and down that social scale. So it was just like catnip for me.
Yeah. Yeah, we can see that. That's pretty cool. Well, I know
That is
Julia
awesome.
was going to give a little bit of a background on the story.
I will, yeah. I would love to let our listeners know a little bit about what this book is about and what they can expect. So let's set the scene. We're in January of 1942, the very beginning of World War II. The Avalon Hotel and Spa is an oasis of elegance and sophistication in an increasingly ugly world. You know, we're coming out of the Great Depression and things are heating up politically. But this Avalon is run with expert precision by June Hudson, the hotel's West Virginia born and bred general manager. And the Avalon is where high society goes to see and be seen, and where the mountain Sweetwater and the fountains and spas can wash away all your troubles. June was trained by the Guilfoyles, the hotel's aristocratic owners, and she's guided the Avalon skillfully through the first pangs of war. Now, however, the Guilfoyle family heir has made a secret deal with the State Department to fill the hotel with captured Axis diplomats. June must convince her staff, many of whom have sons and husbands heading to the front lines, to offer luxury to Nazis with a smile. She must also reckon with Tucker Minnick, the FBI agent whose coal tattoo hints at their shared past in the mountains, and whose search for the diplomat's secrets disrupts the peace that June is fighting so hard to maintain. Hers is a balancing act with dangerous consequences. The Sweetwater beneath the hotel can threaten as well as heal, and only June can manage the springs. As dark alliances and unexpected attractions crack the polished veneer of the Avalon, June must calculate the true cost of luxury. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, Maggie?
I think it's always interesting to describe a Stiefvater novel. Um, there are some creators, I think, as a reader, that you just auto buy their work and you don't care what it is that they're going to write about. You just know that they're going to take you someplace. And I remember that when I signed with my agent, I swapped agents when I went to adult. I wanted to have someone who didn't know anything about my previous work and could just look at the book on the page. And I asked him after he'd read one of my novels, The Scorpio Races. I said, all right, tell me, what do you think a Stiefvater novel is? And he says, I think a Stiefvater novel is that you have taken the reader to a place that they feel is absolutely true, but they know deep in their heart that they can't actually ever go there. And so there's that sense of both aspiration, but also loss already because it only exists inside the books. And so I think that all of those things that you said are true. They really do happen in the book. But I think at the end of the day, I'm really hoping that it's that feeling of going to the Avalon that actually is what lingers with the reader.
That is awesome. I mean, it has that bittersweetness. Like you said, you have to have those negative aspects, like the Nazis, to make the more joyful and luxurious aspects really shine through. And I think you did that. Absolutely. All right, so I'll start with my first question for you. The first time that June saw the Avalon at the top of the hill, she thought it was this wonderful island far away from the problems of the world. But as she reflects, the world has intruded into that private retreat. Things are happening at the Avalon that had never happened before, like a fist fight and a shortcut romance and a marriage. And this soon takes place soon after Pearl Harbor and the US's entry into World War II. Was June experiencing what the nation seemed to be experiencing as a whole, this sort of intrusion into a world that was trying to stay isolated?
Absolutely. I wanted to do two things by paralleling June's story with our story as Americans. And the first one was I really wanted to talk about when we are allowed to be children and when we're allowed to be safe and how we move through cycles of life where sometimes we need to be protected. And sometimes it's time to leave that protection that has made you into something new and powerful, but it's time to step up. And there's a character, Sebastian, who's a waiter, and he comes and is basically made by the Avalon. At one point, Tucker looks at him and realizes that he can't understand the consequences of how cruel the outside world can be because the Avalon is so intent at looking at the individual and what the individual is thinking that it's very difficult to get punished in the way that you can in a world that embraces that individuality. So June comes from a very difficult background, and she arrives at the Avalon when she needs it, and it gives her that safe place to truly become someone who can actually lead other people. But the other thing I wanted to talk about by paralleling June's arc with that outside world is that sense that we don't like to change. Even if we are capable of withstanding change, we hate it. It's always imposed upon us. And yet that's often where you see our true colors. And when I first started writing this novel, it was bound to be a COVID novel. I mean, I wanted to write a hotel novel, and then COVID hit. And so taking all of these people and putting them literally into lockdown seemed to suggest that it was going to be a COVID novel. But something else magnificent happened while I was writing this, which is just after COVID, I began doing something every single summer where I would take hundreds of writers and lock them into Scottish castles, and we would teach them writing. And what we did for most of it was we would actually go through and have them really dismantle everything that they thought about themselves and their creativity, and remove them so far from the rest of the world that they could be anything. And because of that, they could change inside that castle and leave with something else. But I couldn't have done that if I came to their home, even with this exact same knowledge that I would have with writing. It required that really hard break and that removal from the rest of the world. And that whole experience and watching those people change like that. I mean, some of them just changed their entire lives completely after just being in a castle for a week. It made the Avalon into this place where it could allow that kind of hard change. And instead of being a lockdown novel, it was very much this, okay, what is it going to take to turn us into something different? It was more of a chrysalis.
Well, my next question is, how do I sign up to come to your next Scottish castle?
I do love doing it, I have to say.
But
That
that
is
almost
awesome.
reminds me of, Julie and I are both lawyers, and it reminds me of law school, where we try to break everybody down and reteach them how to write and how to do certain things in
How to
that,
think.
yeah.
Yes, I love that you said that. One of my friends, I had her come and she would just, I said, all I want you to do is come in the evening and just take them on a walk because they're going to need to cry. And she said, what are you doing to them? I said, don't worry about what I'm doing. They just need to cry. Just walk and sing with them a little bit. And she said, are you building a cult? And I said, I might be, but it's only a week. You can't build a cult in a week. But it's true. There's something about hand me your identity and I'm going to hold it for you for 7 days, right? And then you can have it back when you leave, but it's like your cell phone. You have to put it down. And I'm just gonna delete all of the apps that are bad for you. And here's your fresh slate and give it back to you. And so it's impossible. It's very funny to think that many of these people will be coming on tour or reading this book. And I really do wonder, are they going to see themselves in June's guests? Because that's the Avalon.
Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. Well, we've alluded to this mineral water, and I want to talk a little bit about that in the story because it runs under and throughout the hotel, but also thematically, it's important because it has touched many lives in many ways. It's referred to as sweetwater, and some fear it because it could turn bitter and harm people and the natural world. But other people, it has the power to heal. Now, in the story, we see where June, at times, I won't give anything away, has to almost immerse herself in it. But Tucker Minnick needed to remove himself from it. And I was wondering if you could talk about the role of the Sweetwater throughout the story, because it almost seemed intimately connected to the truest parts of people's selves. I don't know. That's just how it struck me.
I love using, I should not say using magic in books. I have always, since I was a kid, really loved myth in books. I really started out with King Arthur and stories that were they were like fan fiction of history, but they had magic added to them to amplify the meaning behind them. So you would read a story about a Welsh king who was literally a giant, larger than life, and he would lead his people over a river by laying down over the river, and they would gallop across his back. And the real story would be that in history, there was this larger than life character who they could not defeat the Irish without him. They absolutely needed him. And by taking that magic and turning it into myth, they've made the emotional truth of that story persist. So when I was tracing that Sweetwater through this story, I didn't want it to read as fantasy. I really wanted it to read as just another element that is tying together this concept of June, Tucker, the hotel, and the thing that I really want to talk about, which is the cost of the collective, the cost of luxury, the idea of when you take all of us together, we can do something so much bigger than everyone else. And that means that we can be using that power of the collective for either wonderful things, like June motivating an entire hotel to make sure that people who come there have the absolute best time of their lives, or 3,000 miles away, someone else is motivating all of these individuals into a terrible collective that are erasing entire identities. So I really wanted to talk about, is that free? And of course it's not free. And we understand that intuitively. So by giving her that Sweetwater, that's also tied into West Virginia, a state which has been much maligned and used for other people's benefits, it felt like it was not being prescriptive. I didn't want to write a parable, but I want readers to be thinking about that. In my mind, figurative language and everything that has to do with wonderful literary writing should be working on that level of the unconscious before you dig into it. So you should feel the truth of what I am saying before you actually dig in, rather than saying, well, I believe that this represents this and this and this. So instead, to talk about that cost of the collective and what it means to go into that castle and say, can you hand me your identity for a week? Because it's not free. You're not changing while you're changing other people. And you have to know that when you step into it, go into it with your eyes wide open so that it doesn't begin to bury you.
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite books of all time was The Mists of Avalon. And I thought about it right away as I was reading the story, because I was thinking about that shrouded, that removed aspect where real change is taking place both outside and inside. So that was pretty cool. I think you've got that legend aspect in this story very strong. It's
Well, and I don't know if you've ever been into those mountains, but they're quite potent. I mean, everyone feels something in them. And I was reading this old 19th century book. It was a collection of letters about the springs in these mountains. And they described one area where the man said that you could lay on the ground and within an arm's length, you could put your hand into one hot spring and put a hand into a cold spring. And in between, he said it was covered with moss and all of the snails that you could possibly imagine, the most beautiful snails. And in my head, I just thought that's wonder right there. And part of me wanted to go into those mountains and find that. And part of me wanted it to be like the spring that June encounters, where I just wanted it to not have to give me anything.
yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, I wanted to go back to something you said a few minutes ago about this collective and how much people can actually accomplish when they come together. And the Avalon had so many people making the magic happen, right? But it's the Sweetwater aside, it was the epitome of luxury to people. And some people felt that it was this beacon of happiness, and they treated it almost like an escape, right? So there were these people that that were making these miserable conditions for everyone else in the Great Depression leading up to this war. And we're talking about the mining company owners, the railroad magnates, anybody that had this level of wealth that was so beyond any worries that the people in the valley were actually experiencing, and the people in the hollers and the people that June came from. And so the Avalon was sort of like that escape, but it was created by the Guilfoyles, which was one of those people in that upper echelon, and it was driven by, the people on the lower side. So this class dichotomy that you showed, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on just that level of escapism that was going on and that we got to see both sides of?
Yes. So when I first started writing this novel, I was certain I was going to debunk luxury. That was just my thought. I'm very middle class. I said I grew up in the valley. I'm very solidly middle class. I'm a doctor's daughter, but certainly no upward mobility here. Redneck at heart. And I just thought, yeah, this is ridiculous. When you look at the opulence, you just think this is ridiculous. And so I dove into this idea of research for what does June's Day look like? And to do this, I not only read these primary sources, for instance, I went and got all of the issues of the Hotel Monthly from 1935 to 1942, and I read all of them. But I also interviewed a bunch of luxury hoteliers, modern luxury hoteliers, professors from the Cornell School of Hospitality, and my favorite, a luxury hotelier who managed many properties, including one in Switzerland that went for $54,000 a night. So just the range. And what amazed me was that they all had the exact same answer as to what luxury really required. And it was this: your name. And it was because they said, imagine this: door opens, Bill walks out into the hall and the staff says, "Good morning, Bill." And it's understood that it is this metaphorical transaction where he is wanted but not needed. This is someone who has everything and is asked for something all the time. And yet this is being known but not being needed. That is luxury. And to know that if you say Bill, a hotel guest can be stereotyped and you can just assume what they would like, clean linens or champagne. But Bill is an individual, which means maybe Bill doesn't like champagne. Maybe Bill wants to sleep in a narrow bed because he tosses and turns. And so knowing that individual is what luxury is. And what was interesting is once I knew that, when you dove into the actual day-to-day workings of these massive luxury hotels, yes, they had this sheen of opulence, but the reason why they left their money and came to luxury was because these hotels would remember where they put their shoes when they got out of the bed. They would remember which horse they liked to ride. They would remember if they actually ate breakfast. And so when they came, they just felt absolutely known. It was like being a beloved child again. And that is luxury. And I thought by the end of it, we actually need more of that kind of luxury in the world, but it is very expensive. It does require a lot of people all agreeing to play that game, and you can't live in it. And I think that's actually the side that I came down on, is that these cycles of when it is appropriate to have all eyes on you, lifting you up, it's, you can't live like that, but everyone should live like that a little bit. And so I think that's what June lands on. And then the final thing, it's just that power of collective is you can't always live in that power of collective too. You can do amazing things with the collective, but because of the danger of being wrong, it also means it's worth taking that moment and stepping back and saying, I'm going to do something just on my own as an individual, knowing it's going to be small and it's going to be transient because I'm just playing. I'm just finding out who I am before I go and say, all right, guys, let's go in. Let's take the castle.
Yeah. June was so good at that, wasn't she? In terms of not just remembering, but really actually caring about what the guests cared about. And I thought that was a really cool aspect of this story, is her character. And that shone throughout the whole story.
She
I
did
loved her.
throughout too. I kind of did too by the end. I was like, I want to hang out. I want to, be a part of her life. But she multiple times was wrestling a little bit with Haas, like her job, and her as the woman and what she wanted. So, I mean, I like her ending and her story, and I'm not going to give anything away, but she just, I think, blossomed as a person throughout.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something Julia just said, because again, that was another theme running throughout your story, is this idea of duty. And I thought it was really cool because, first of all, we have this hotel serving guests that perhaps they loathed, because the Avalon was known for its luxury and having that highest level of service. But then we also saw FBI agent Minnick, and he was bureau minded. I use that in quotes, expected to put the needs and the interests of the FBI even ahead of his own, even his personal life. And June, like Julia just mentioned, she pondered her role as Haas, the boss, versus June, the woman. And I thought it was also cool because we saw that same theme of duty and order mirrored in the Japanese guests, where there was a scene where they reorganized a room because they wanted it to reflect their notions of duty and order. So I wanted to ask you about this, because is it sustainable to always be bureau minded or duty minded, or are we built to be relational?
That's such an interesting question, because I think that we're actually very built to be, like you said, relational. But I think a lot of people conflate that with duty, which means that if the collective asks them to act on that relationship, then suddenly it has become duty, right? You're being asked to do something that you yourself don't truly believe in. But for the sake of that relationship, you're going to do it. And I think I really like this question. It's very much the opposite of true luxury, of true knowing an individual. You're not saying, do you really think that you should do this? You're thinking, well, because you want to do it. And I do think it's not sustainable. And that's what June ultimately is grappling with. She knows that her staff loves her and she truly loves them as well. And she knows at one point at the very beginning, so this is not a spoiler, when she discovers that these diplomats are really coming to her hotel, she thinks, how can I ask them to do this when there's so many of them that have lost relatives at Pearl Harbor or are Jewish? How can I ask them to serve the enemy? Absolute luxury. And the worst part is that she knows that if she asks, they will do it because they believe that she knows what is right. And I think that that's exactly the question that she is asking is this relational or is this duty? And do I feel good about cashing in those chips for something like this? At what point is it a bridge too far?
Yeah. And along those lines, I kept thinking to myself, how far can we press people before they break in the line of duty?
I
Right.
do think one of the things that really struck me is, gosh, so I was a history major, which means diving into the research for this was it was, it was so nice. Really, it was. I can't say it was work at all, even though it was so many texts I was reading, it wasn't work at all. But it was, gosh, it was hard. People were so lonely back then, and the quality of life was so low for most people. And they just assumed horrible things would happen. And it was so easy to strip them of their identities because people would just assume that to be seen as an individual or to have a good life was something that only the upper class did, that it wasn't really even attainable. And so the loneliness was really difficult to watch people being pushed into duty rather than relationship in the hopes that by performing a duty, it would transform into a relationship and just doing awful things in the name of it. So it was really hard. I have to say the worst one that I read was probably I read a really touching one from the first Japanese POW. He was one of the suicide submariners from Pearl Harbor and he was captured alive. He thought he was going to die and he had a really fascinating story of being taken to an American POW camp and being deprogrammed essentially and learning that he didn't have to be there for duty. He could be an individual and still create a society around him. I mean, it's fascinating to read, but it was absolutely heartbreaking to just see how difficult their lives were and how lonesome they were.
Yeah. Very interesting. I kind of want to know 10 years later what happens with some of these characters. So maybe think about that for a. Well, I know.
I am known for my series, but I do love a standalone because I do love really intentional storytelling. The older I get, the more I love that sense of opening up a book or watching a show and knowing that the creator knows what they want to do. Even if I don't know that I'm going to like what they do, knowing that they have an idea in their mind is very appealing to me.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I used to be a TV only person. And then as I, aged, I was like, you know what? I love a movie because I sit down and it's packaged for me.
You did too.
So on that note, and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because I know this isn't even out yet. The listeners isn't out yet. But do you plan on staying in the world of adult fiction? Do you have anything that you feel comfortable sharing with our listeners about what's next for you?
Oh, I feel very happy in the world of adult fiction. Now that I'm writing about people old enough to pay taxes, I don't know if I could go back. But I think, yeah, right now I'm working on something that I really, really love. And I do think it's going to be just in that exact same genre of wonder, even though I think it looks very different from the listeners. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this genre is that there's no promises, but from book to book. So it's very appealing.
That's pretty cool. Well, I want to tell our listeners how to get in touch with you. They can find you at your website, MaggieStiefvater.com. And I'm going to spell it MaggieStiefvater. And on your website, you have not only these beautiful novels, but also your artwork, your music. You are incredibly talented. Talk about a triple threat. Um, we could do a whole nother show just on your beautiful, beautiful artwork. So I'm going to tell our listeners to go check that out. You're also on Facebook, on X, on Instagram. And we just want to thank you because we loved reading this book. We loved talking about it. And we have learned a lot of, just even talking about the loneliness of the time of history that you're addressing. That's a really, really telling and interesting thing because we're the children and grandchildren of those individuals. So I love your books for that reason. Plus, you'll be entertained and thrilled while reading it. So thank you.
Thank you guys so much. This was such a good
Um,
time.
All right, Julia, that was a really incredible interview with Maggie. I can tell that first of all, she's incredibly smart,
Oh,
but
yes.
also thoughtful and thought-provoking. And for me reading this story, I kept thinking about all kinds of other tangents, and it turns out she really was thinking along those lines.
No, absolutely. And I think we mentioned earlier offline that she weaves her themes so intricately and tightly together that they are apparent on every page. And as we were talking with her, I realized that that was through the details. So it wasn't just Nazism and it wasn't just a luxury and it wasn't just hospitality or even the mountains or the water. It was just in the details all throughout. She almost brings you along on her journey through a stay in this hotel. That's how it felt.
Yeah, effortlessly.
Effortless.
It's incredible.
Yep.
Well, I
That's
want to tell our listeners then about some other outstanding authors that we have coming up. We've got Christina McMorris coming back for The Girls of Good Fortune, Ryan Steck with Monarch, Rick Mafina, If Two Are Dead, Chanel Cleaton, The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes, Jesse Rosen, All the Signs, Tess Gerritsen, The Summer Guest, Adriana Trigiani, The View from Lake Como. And listeners, we're growing every week. Thank you for sharing our socials. We're so happy that you're listening and tuning in. You can find us at bookstormpodcast.com, our website. We're on YouTube. Just search for Bookstorm and Podcast. We should come right up. And we're also on X, on Instagram, and we are just grateful for you. You know the best authors, they are here on Bookstorm Podcast, and that's why you're tuning in. So stay with us for next week.